You know, drilling mud is kind of the lifeblood of the well. I mean, yeah, you've got to have the rig, you've got to have the people out there to run it, but the information is gained by what this mud does. So in drilling a well and spending $500,000, you know, in maybe 7 or 8 days to, well, a little bit longer than that, maybe by the time you get it completed, maybe 2 weeks, you spend $500,000 to get a well, which you may not get because it may be a dry hole. But this mud of that $500,000 that you're going to use and spend to complete this well, this may only cost you about $16,000, $16,000 for what we're going to show you. But again, it's so critical to the drilling of the well that you've got to do it right. And if you don't do it right, you can have a tremendous failure. You can lose everything. And so I mentioned earlier my beautiful assistant, my wife, she mixed up the mud. I told her what to do, but she mixed it up. And so, you know, all the presenters should have an assistant to help them, you know, that did the work for them. So, but we've got this mud, and it's got those 4 functions that we mentioned. You know, you remember in there. So the actual piece of equipment that drills the well is this bit, and this one's fake. You know, if it was real, if it was real, you know, it'd weigh 300 pounds, and the table would be broke down and the whole deal, and it would have a hole here. And so, you know, we've got our drill pipe that's on top, and the drill pipe's got the hole, you know, where the mud goes down. And as the mud goes down, the most important part of the bit for the mud are these jets. So these holes here are the jets. There's 4 of them in this well, or in this bit. And the mud comes through. These buttons on this bit are titanium and other very hard metal alloys. There's some chromium and different things in there. But these are what actually cuts this rock. This is a core, and we would use, this is probably a 12 1/4 or 13 3/8 or something bit, but this, the bit we would normally use would be a 7 7/8. That's typically the bit that we would use. So, drilling the well, the mud goes down. This bit can cost up to $50,000. So the bit costs way more than the mud, 3 times more. And the bit may be as much as 10% of the cost of the well to drill. So the first thing that this drilling mud does is it protects this bit by lubricating it, so that these cutting surfaces have an opportunity to do what they're supposed to do for the maximum amount of time. You know, as hard as these are, you know, a bit may drill 1 well, it may drill a well and a half. Sometimes if you get really lucky, it might drill 2 wells. I mean, that would be really, really fortunate. So you want to protect these cutting surfaces, and that's what one of the attributes and characteristics of the drilling mud is that it protects that bit. The second thing is, as you drill, you're cutting this rock, and as the well is drilled, these cuttings come up, and I'll pass these around, and the hands on the rig, they will come out to the flow ditch, and we've got a sample catcher out here, and they will catch these samples, and they will put them in these little bags. You can pass that around. And, you know, they'll write on there the depth of where the samples were from. This one was from 3230 to 3235. And so that's where this rock came from, you know, down in the ground. So this mud has to carry those rock chips to the surface so that the geologist can look at them, and the driller or the sample catcher, he may, get a sniff, see if he smells oil. He may also wait a few minutes, and if there's oil stain comes on the side of the bag, those are good signs that there's oil there. So he's looking for things like that. And so that's what the drilling mud does. Secondly, it carries the cuttings to the surface. The third thing, it's drilling this rock, and it's drilling this 7 7/8 hole. So this is like a 3-inch core, but 3-inch core barrel. But even in this little sample, you can see that this piece of limestone has some little holes in it. And so you're looking for those holes, but those holes, if you will, imagine them being like a filter, okay? And so what happens when you push against a filter? Things try to separate, don't they? It's either going to go through or it's not going to go through. And so if you're squeezing out your apple cider, anybody ever done that? Oh, you go to the orchard. Have you done it?
I have.
Oh, yeah. And you squeeze that press down, and all the fluid comes out of the apples or the peaches or whatever, and it goes into the bucket, and man, it's good stuff. But then what's left? It's just a bunch of dry pulp, and so what you don't want to happen is for this drilling mud, because at 3,000 feet, remember we said the PSI per foot gradient of fresh water was 0.433 PSI per foot. If you take 9.4 pounds per gallon mud, which it's probably fairly close to that, 9.4 times 0.052, if you take 8.33 times 0.042, you get 8.33 pound per gallon of water times 0.052, it's 0.433. 9.4 times 0.052 is going to be what? 0.44, 0.45, something like that. And so it's exerting pressure on that core, on that rock, and it's trying to squeeze the water out of that mud. So we've got a guy that comes out every day or more often as necessary called a mud engineer. And the mud engineer's job is to make sure that the water doesn't separate out of this mud. We want it mixed properly. We want it to have the characteristics and the parameters of good mud that's going to be able to drill this well without the water separating out, causing us to have mud cake, mud filtrate. You're going to have some regardless, but you want to minimize that. So that's what the mud engineer does. He'll check the viscosity, he'll check the plastic viscosity, he'll check all of the characteristics of this mud to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. Because everyone wants to have the best opportunity. If you're spending $500,000 in 2 weeks, you want to have the best chance of, you're not going to say, okay, well, we're just going to throw $500,000 out there and hope something good happens. You want everything to be as close to perfect as you can. Okay, so that's the third thing it does. It keeps the well, conditions the well bore so that it doesn't cave in, so you don't have too much mud cake, because if you have mud cake, it can actually stick this bit, and you may twist off, you may lose this bit in the hole, and that's $50,000 plus all the drill pipe that you've got in the well. Okay, so that's 3 things. So the last thing is it keeps the well bore under control. So I always ask this question. So I'm going to start off with a little bit different way of asking it this time. Does anybody know who Spencer Tracy is? Anybody at all? No? Have you heard of Spencer Tracy? What do you think he did? Was he a cowboy or? Actor. He was an actor. So Spencer Tracy and Claudette Colbert, which was another actress from way back when, and some guy that was in Gone with the Wind. Well, is that his name? Clark Gable, yeah. So these three are in this movie called Boomtown. So if you ever get a chance to watch Boomtown, you know, you'll see Spencer Tracy. I think you actually see Uncle Joe from Petticoat Junction in there too. Well, in some ways, because he was the supply company, so he was always looking to make a deal, you know. I mean, yeah. So anyway, so if you get a chance to watch that movie, watch it. Because in that movie, whenever they hit a gusher and it blows up over the top of the rig and they're all standing out there and the oil's dripping all over them and they're all shouting and happy and life is great and they're going to be millionaires and all of this. We don't like that, you know, in today's age. Number one, you know, the oil that's spraying all over the ground, it's kind of hard to pick up and sell. And number two, we don't want to get the call from the EPA saying, hey, what did you do out there? And how come there's this big mess all over the ground? So we don't like that call. So the drilling mud keeps the well under control. Keeps it under control so it doesn't blow out. The oil and gas stay in the well until we say that it can come out. We like well control. Okay? So the mud, you know, everybody's interested in the mud because this log, if this mud's not right, this log's not going to be right. And if this log's not right, it's going to lie to me and tell me I've got oil someplace where I don't have it, or I'm going to say, well, I don't know if that really looks very good or not. I don't think we better perforate it because it might all be salt water. And we may miss an oil producing zone because our mud is not the way it needs to be. So again, the mud is very important to the drilling of the well. So if you want to come in and get a little closer, I got a little demonstration here because this mud, you know, my wife has mixed it up, and as never fails, it's as we do get toward the end of all the presentations, it's just about perfect now. So you guys are at the perfect point of the mud. But you can kind of see that the way it looks, there's some ripples in there, and it's been setting for a few minutes, but this mud has gel strength. And this is a little bit more viscous than we would typically use it. But again, it's got to be right because we don't want it to be too thick, we don't want it to be too thin. So the mud engineer's job is very important. So the gel strength of this mud, as I begin to pick this up, you'll see that it won't really move. And the more I pick it up, it just kind of barely starts moving. But I'm going to have to get this up here close to about 30 degrees before this really starts sliding toward the end of the container. So, you know, there's getting close to 45 degrees. It's moved about as far as it's going to move. But if I go back and forth a few times, then I pick it up, it instantly slides down. So I've broken the gel strength. So the plastic viscosity is what I'm really looking for. And so the TY, or the gel strength of that mud, is what I want to keep low. But then I also want the viscosity. I'm very picky about the mud because it's that important. So again, the mud's, it's made from this powder. It's just dirt. It's very fine, you know. I tried to pick some of it up, you know, and it's just powder. And then this, if you want to put your finger in it, I mean, it's this dirt, it's fresh water, and I put a little soap in here to reduce the surface tension of the water so that it would mix better, faster, so my wife wouldn't have to work so hard mixing the mud. But, you know, doesn't take long for it to get a little gel strength because there's a little hump, you know, on my finger where, and then if I put that in there, then all of the little waves that got made from the mud are just still there. So any questions? Not at all? Let's see, what other movies could you watch?
Is the mud made from the aggregates that are mined in Illinois?
Not so much. A lot of, since this is clay, it's yellow clay, a lot of the drilling mud comes from the Dakotas, Wyoming. Earlier, there was a young man from around Streeter in Ottawa where some of the sand mines are. And that Ottawa sand is very much in demand for fracturing. And so a lot of that gets used around the world. 2040 Ottawa sand is a premium sand. It's one of Illinois', you know. Yep. So you know, it comes from the St. Peter Formation, it's called. So it's, you know, fairly deep, but it's nice and white. It's very uniform. It's almost a perfect sand. I mean, it really is. And we've used a lot of it. I used to work for a service company, and we always used to be bragging because, you know, we had 2040 Ottawa sand right here in our home state. So, yeah.
Is that to size? Is there much bigger?
Oh, they can be bigger. Okay. Yeah. We probably the largest bit that commonly is in use would be for 20-inch casing. So it's going to be like a 23-inch.
It'll be like, this is by 2 foot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another movie would be Tulsa.
Yeah. Tulsa.
Always gotta have a movie day. When you need to have a movie day.
Yep.
Tulsa, Boomtown. If you want to see how they put out oil fires, you can watch Hellfighters.
Yeah, Hellfighters with John Wayne. Yeah. And I will say that, I mean, you know, back in the first Gulf War, Iraq had, you know, bombed Kuwait, and there were a lot of oil well fires. This movie was made in 1968, Hellfighters. You know, the first Gulf War was 1991 or so. And so they were putting those fires out in 91, 92. But a lot of what they did in Hellfighters is really, really very accurate, you know, in the putting out of an oil well fire. So it's a good movie to watch.